In the mid to late 90s, Rare was killing it on the N64. Killer Instinct Gold, Blast Corps, Diddy Kong Racing, Banjo-Kazooie, Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64, Banjo-Tooie, and Conker's Bad Fur Day are all games that still have followings to this day. It felt like Rare was absolutely untouchable for a while, and it was during this time that they developed Goldeneye 007. As a kid, this game was ubiquitous. My parents wouldn't let me have a copy, so it was years later before I really got to check it out. But it was a staple of social gatherings. Most everything that can be said about this game has been. It's one of the biggest games ever. To me, though, it's just the start of the story. After Goldeneye rocked our collective socks, as it were, things got a little weird for the James Bond license. Tomorrow Never Dies was released in 1998 on the PlayStation 1 to mediocre reception, and The World Is Not Enough saw an N64 release, but still got a lackluster response. The thing is, neither of these games was developed by Rare. They were both EA projects in collaboration with MGM. Rare wouldn't actually make another FPS until Perfect Dark in 2000. For those who haven't played it, Perfect Dark is GoldenEye perfected. It's set in a shadowy cyberpunk future full of corporate espionage, advanced weaponry, and aliens? It gets weird, but my god was it fun. It's just a shame that it didn't see the same level of success as GoldenEye. Then again, the reasons why are kind of understandable. It came out late in the life cycle of the N64, it required an expansion pack to play, and it never really ran well on the hardware. If you're even vaguely interested in this game, and trust me, you should be, the best way to play it is the Xbox Live Arcade version. This is also the version included with Rare Replay on the Xbox One. While not quite as popular as its predecessor, Perfect Dark did still sell well, and it's still a much beloved title to this day. What happened to it? It got a prequel, Perfect Dark Zero, which was released early in the Xbox 360's life cycle. By this point, Microsoft had purchased Rare and put out the aforementioned Perfect Dark XBLA edition, and Zero. Zero was a good game if you ask me, but it didn't really live up to the Perfect Dark name. Remember that this is a game whose quality is directly compared to GoldenEye. Those are big shoes to fill, and it doesn't really succeed. A new Perfect Dark title has been announced, and I'm extremely hopeful that it'll be something special, but it's tough to imagine it recapturing the spirit of the original. By this point, anyone who's read the title is probably wondering what any of this has to do with Free Radical. Well, don't worry, we're getting there. GoldenEye is considered by some to be one of the greatest games of all time, but the later James Bond games fail to recapture the magic of that classic. This is due in part to the fact that they're from a different developer. Perfect Dark is every bit GoldenEye's peer, but both that franchise and Rare began to go downhill. What happened? A number of things, but part of the answer is that Free Radical happened. Free Radical was founded in 1999 by a few former Rare employees, many of whom worked on Perfect Dark and GoldenEye. It was here that they would create a game series that, to my mind at least, surpasses even the lofty standards set by those two landmark titles. Timesplitters released in October of 2000 on the PlayStation 2. The story is pretty simple. You take on the role of a group of human agents who travel through time trying to keep time crystals out of the hands of monsters called Timesplitters. The story of the first game, though, is kind of irrelevant. There are no cutscenes, and the levels themselves are pretty basic. The gist is it's part time trial and part maze. You have to find an object and reach the exit. There's no time limit, but the game does record your times. The pacing is breakneck, as even on easy mode the combat is difficult. The best tactic is to do a few scouting runs first to find the item and the exit, and then make a mad dash. While the core of what would make the later games great is present, it's pretty clear that this is the earliest entry in the series. It feels like a proof of concept more than anything. What is present is the series' trademark art style. All the characters are heavily stylized, and it lends the game a timeless visual appeal. While realistic graphics tend to age like milk, good art can absolutely stand the test of time, and here I think it's done so. One cool feature is that this game supports the PS2 multi-tap. Up to 4 players can join in the multiplayer and split screen. There are also bots that can round out the games. It's clear that this game is leaning pretty heavily on the multiplayer. That makes sense though, since that's what most players remember from GoldenEye. One interesting note is that while the game fully supports modern dual joystick controllers, it still retains the precision aim mode of GoldenEye. Normally you can use the very generous auto-aim to take down enemies, but you can also freeze in place and take a more accurate shot. What's more, the game leans into this by having enemies like zombies, which require a shot to the head to take down. This attention to detail is great, and there's no doubt that it would lay the groundwork for the next entry. Timesplitters II was the first in the series that I played. It was love at first sight. This is where the series really picks up. The levels get proper cutscenes and objectives beyond just sprinting through. While the story is pretty much the same as the first, down to many of the characters making a return, everything just feels more polished. The objectives show off how you can mess with the set dressing, and can be really fun and creative. By the game's very nature, the levels are incredibly varied, from Notre Dame to Neo-Tokyo, and the atmosphere is phenomenal. The game is not without its faults, though. The difficulty on the last few levels is cranked up to the absolute max, even on normal. While there is a story, it's fairly forgettable. There's not much overarching plot, you mostly just jump from one level to the next in a disjointed manner. Some of the objectives can be hard to work out and a little obtuse when you do. These are nitpicks, though. The game is absolutely phenomenal and totally worth your time. Notice, though, that I've mostly been focusing on the story. This is because I don't really have the requisite hardware and friends to put together a proper split-screen party. But there is still a lot more to explore with this game. There are challenge maps and multiplayer modes which let you play as a wide array of characters and engage with some of the more exotic weapons and locations that might only get a brief look in the campaign. In the same vein as Goldeneye and Perfect Dark, the game was a great pickup for those living in college dorms, as people could seamlessly drop in and out of the multiplayer at any time. There are lots of modes to this game to keep things fun and fresh, and I could absolutely see almost anyone being able to make this title last a long time. Timesplitters II is a clear home run for the company, but the next entry still manages to one-up it. Timesplitters Future Perfect is the best FPS I've played. Period. I don't make that statement lightly, it's genuinely that good. The game takes the mechanics and art direction Free Radical have been refining, and drops them into a full-fledged, narrative-driven experience. The story of Future Perfect is a direct sequel. After spending the first two games collecting the time crystals...
Is that them? Beautiful.
Sergeant Cortez, our protagonist, must find a way to deal the killing blow to the Timesplitters. In the process, he discovers a mysterious time traveler who seems linked somehow to the creatures. This is all, of course, a setup for the normal temporal hijinks the series is known for, and some new ones. For example, I love how in almost every level you form a stable time loop wherein you meet up with yourself and fight off some zombies or perhaps throw yourself a key, and then later on play through that same segment from the perspective of your other self.
You shoot almost as good as I do. This is my exit. You'll find all the equipment you'll need down that way. Well, why don't I just come with you? We make a pretty good team. That's what I said too. But think about it. Where would you be if I hadn't shown up back there? You're right. I know. Catch you later.
Doubling down on the last entry's move toward a more narrative focus, Future Perfect has mid-mission cutscenes and a coherent narrative with twists and turns and genuine character arcs. There's comedy and drama to it. Mostly comedy, admittedly.
I pressed it already.
Yeah, right. So, been with the agency long?
But it manages to take the mostly silent protagonists of the previous games and breathe life and character into them.
You go first.
Okay.
They're not deep by any means, but there's something to be said for personality and style. The levels are much longer and more varied as well. Everything just feels bigger. What's more, I love that this time around we get more mid-mission checkpoints. Timesplitters 1 had none. You did the level in one shot and that was that. 2 mixed things up with a checkpoint usually about halfway through. And that's fine, but on some of the longer levels and toward the end, it could get really tedious, especially if it was the end-of-level boss that took you out. Having to go through the same sections of level over and over really started to grate on a couple of levels in particular. With Future Perfect, things feel much more modernized and forgiving. I know some purists will mock me for my insistence on convenience features, but I play games to have fun ultimately. That said, it can hurt some levels. There's a horror-themed sequence with some brilliant enemies and bosses that loses its impact slightly when you realize how low the stakes are. On the other hand, the fact that there is enough atmosphere to make me feel that way is a testament to how well crafted the game is. Lending to that atmosphere is the sound design. I haven't touched on this yet, but the composer for the series is Graham Norgate. He did some great work at Rare, and with Timesplitters, his work is top-notch. Hey guys, Future Bobcat here. I also wanted to point out that with Future Perfect, Norgate worked with Christian Markison on the soundtrack. Just wanted to make sure both of them got credited in the video. Audio in my mind is one of the most underrated aspects of gaming. The sheer number of people I see playing games on multi-$1,000 machines with insanely nice monitors, and then who have a cheap set of earbuds or a crappy gaming headset plugged in is maddening. Yes, I know PewDiePie uses Razer headsets. That doesn't make them good. Seriously, invest in your audio setup. Get a cheap DAC amp off of Amazon, get you some open back headphones. It's going to do a world of good for your gaming, particularly with horror games. I'm such a big advocate for audio in games because I grew up in a transitional period for games. I saw some of the amazing sprite work of the late 2D era give way to wireframe monstrosities as early 3D took over. What's more, I experienced it on a 13-inch CRT TV. The first time I booted up the original Halo, I remember hearing that iconic theme though, and being in awe. I have my issues with the sound design, but the theme is unimpeachable. It creates such an amazing sense of scale. Even though the massive ring that you're on is on a 13-inch TV, it feels huge. Skyrim and I have had our differences, but the theme, as the chanting starts, and you hear the drums, and everything starts swelling. The first time I heard it on a big sound system, it sent a chill down my spine. I'm as musically inept as they come, but I'm a sucker for a good score. Duel of the Fates was absolutely one of the best things to come out of the Star Wars prequels. Ennio Morricone's score for the Man with No Name trilogy has some of the most recognizable pieces of music ever created, even outside of the Western genre. I'm gushing a bit, but my point is, the score of a movie or a game does so much to convey emotion and scale, and the soundtrack of Timesplitters is sensational. If you take nothing else from this video, go listen to the OST for Timesplitters Future Perfect. And on top of that, the sound design in general is just great. Part of the way I judge a shooter's sound design is by the shotguns. I can excuse a lot of things, but an anemic shotgun is not one of them. The shotguns here feel weighty and powerful without being annoying. The sound effects are the right mix of cartoony and realistic to come across beautifully. It's so easy to get sucked into both the beautiful ambient tracks and the sillier dance numbers. I guess now is the time where I come up with some criticisms for Future Perfect. I've got it. Calling the FAL a Soviet rifle is an affront. It was called the right arm of the free world. It was used by 80+ countries, none of which were Soviet. In fact, it was used by the entirety of the British Commonwealth. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, where Rare is from. I know not everyone is super up on guns, but this was your rifle. You used the AK in the second game and clearly had no problem with it. It's not owned by a company. You don't have to pay Mikhail Kalashnikov a royalty for showing an AK. This is baffling, and frankly, it makes the game borderline unplayable, but I'm glad I was able to power through and see the rest of it. I could go on forever about Timesplitters, but for the sake of you guys, it's time I wrap things up, and I need to ask the tough questions. The first game is probably the weakest in the series if you ask me, but it's still a fun gem. Is it any good? Yeah. Is it a well-made game? It lacks some of the features of its sequels, but taken in isolation, it's still a fun one. Did I have fun? Speedrunning isn't my thing, and the general lack of story in the game was disappointing, but there's still a lot of fun to be had here. Would I recommend it to others? As a piece of gaming history, I absolutely would. As a game, though, I think the series only went up from here. If you're looking for a fun split-screen multiplayer game, I'd say go for one of the later entries. And with that, I think you know my answers to these questions for 2 and Future Perfect. I will say, though, that if you're new to the series, the first 2 are not required playing. 2 especially is great, and I would recommend it, but you wouldn't miss much jumping straight to the 3rd entry, and the polish it brings. So did Free Radical ever do anything else? As a matter of fact, they did. In all, the company produced 5 games. But, as this video is running a little bit long, and because I feel they deserve their own video, I'm going to cover those separately. So if those 2 games might be of interest to you, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, or at the very least, stay tuned for more. Whatever happened to Free Radical? David Doak, who had been around since the Rare days, was one of the founding members of the company and played instrumental roles in all the games I've talked about. Left the company in 2009 to work on his own game projects. Free Radical itself was bought up. At one point they were working on Star Wars Battlefront 3, which of course didn't pan out. Ultimately they became Crytek UK and wound up developing the Crysis sequels, and the console port of Crysis. Later the company was restructured into Dambuster Studios, who would go on to work on Homefront: The Revolution. A game which contains something very near and dear to my heart, on an arcade cabinet tucked away. But for that story, I'd recommend checking out the video that I've linked in the description. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.